Hey everyone, welcome back and thank you for being here. I had some food. I had some fried rice that was um for some reason gifted to me. I think it was from the universe. However you guys whatever that means to y'all. Um Went to a sushi restaurant a few weeks ago for the lunch special, and I was just like try to be really respectful of um wait staff because I've bussed tables before, and started talking to the guy there, and he explained that the old guy was gone, and it was him now. He asked if he had seen me before, and I was like, no, but maybe you have one of those faces. Um, and then by the end of it, he gave me fried rice for free. I guess like their family meal. I don't know. Maybe it was just from the kitchen. I know his name. I'm not gonna say his name because I don't rap, but um, good man and grateful for the food. It was really nourishing. And I've got some water if I need it. It's later at night, so I can't have caffeine. Okay. Part two of Dewey, back in the middle of chapter one. In this part, we're going to answer the questions, how do the rhythms, well, we're going to answer the question, how do the rhythms of disintegration and consummation between the live creature and its environment produce aesthetic experience? And one answer to that is that one answer to that is that aesthetic experience itself is the gratifying feeling between rhythms of the live creature with its environment and past. Without disintegration, strife, conflict, and effort, consummation would not be possible. Without consummation and reunion, conflict would be painful and meaningless. Um, Something that may not have been clear is that the consummation is not just a present integration of rhythms, but also an integration of previous rhythms with the present. So integrating all of your lessons, connecting the past suffering with the present meaning. Hold on. Sorry, I think the carbs from the rice are dehydrating me, so I drink a bunch of water. Okay, middle at the section break in chapter one. We cannot answer these questions any more than we can trace the development of art out of everyday experience unless we have a clear and coherent idea of what is meant when we say normal experience. Fortunately, the road to arriving at such an idea is open and well marked. The nature of experience is determined, just checking levels, making sure everything works. The nature of experience is determined by the essential conditions of life. While man is other than bird and beast, he shares basic vital functions with them and has to make the same basal adjustments if he is to continue the process of living. Having the same vital needs, man derives the means by which he breathes, moves, looks, and listens, the very brain with which he coordinates his senses and his movements, from his animal forebears. The organs with which he maintains himself in being are not of himself alone, but by the grace of struggles and achievements of a long line of animal ancestry. Fortunately, a theory of the place of the aesthetic in experience does not have to lose itself in minute details when it starts with experience in its elemental form. Broad outlines suffice. The first great consideration is that life goes on in an environment, not merely in it, but because of it, through interaction with it. No creature lives merely under its skin. Its subcutaneous organs are means of connection with what lies beyond its bodily frame, and to which, in order to live, it must adjust itself by accommodation and defense, but also by conquest. At every moment, the living creature is exposed to dangers from its surroundings, And at every moment, it must draw upon something in its surroundings to satisfy its needs. The career and destiny of a living being are bound up with its interchanges with its environment, not externally, but in the most intimate way. So here we have Dewey basically saying that consciousness, existence, experience, meaning, aesthetic experience, it's all through the environment, and there is no clean separation at where our skin stops, or our skin is, right? Not externally, but in the most intimate way. Not external to consciousness, not external to the pursuit of needs, not external to the body, the self, not external to experience. The growl of a dog, crouching over his food, his howl in time of loss and loneliness, the wagging of his tail at the return of his human friend are expressions of the implication of a living creature in a natural medium, which includes man along with the animal he has domesticated. Every need, say hunger for fresh air or food, is a lack that denotes at least a temporary absence of adequate adjustment with surroundings. But it is also a demand, a reaching out into the environment to make good the lack and to restore adjustment by building at least a temporary equilibrium. Life itself consists of phases in which the organism falls out of step with the march of surrounding things and then recovers unison with it, either through effort or by some happy chance. And in a growing life, the recovery is never mere return to a prior state, for it is enriched by the state of disparity and resistance through which it has successfully passed. If the gap between organism and environment is too wide, the creature dies. If its activity is not enhanced by the temporary alienation, it merely subsists. Life grows when a temporary falling out is a transition to a more extensive balance of the energies of the organism with those of the conditions under which it lives. These biological commonplaces are something more than that. They reach to the roots of the aesthetic and experience. The world is full of things that are indifferent and even hostile to life. The very processes by which life is maintained tend to throw it out of gear with its surroundings. Nevertheless, if life continues, and if in continuing it expands, there is an overcoming of factors of opposition and conflict. There is a transformation of them into differentiated aspects of a higher powered and more significant life. The marvel of organic, of vital adaptation through expansion, instead of by contraction and passive accommodation, actually takes place. Here in germ are balance and harmony, attained through rhythm. Equilibrium comes about not mechanically and inertly, but out of and because of tension. So there we have tension and effort again. There is in nature, even below the level of life, something more than mere flux and change. Form is arrived at whenever a stable, even though moving, equilibrium is reached. Changes interlock and sustain one another. Wherever there is this coherence, there is endurance. Order is not imposed from without, but is made out of the relations of harmonious interactions that energies bear to one another, because it is active, not anything static because foreign to what goes on. Order itself develops. So this is where he talks about the self-organization of experience, of aesthetic experience. It comes to include within its balanced movement a greater variety of changes. Order cannot but be admirable in a world constantly threatened with disorder. In a world where living creatures can go on living only by taking advantage of whatever order exists about them, incorporating it into themselves. In a world like ours, every living creature that attains sensibility welcomes order with a response of harmonious feeling whenever it finds a congruous order about it. For only when an organism shares in the ordered relations of its environment does it secure the stability essential to living. And when the participation comes after a phase of disruption and conflict, It bears within itself the germs of a consummation akin to the aesthetic. The rhythm of loss and integration with environment and recovery of union not only persists in man, but becomes conscious with him. Its conditions are material out of which he forms purposes. Emotion is the conscious sign of a break, actual or impending. The discord is the occasion that induces reflection. Desire for restoration of the union converts mere emotion into interest in objects as conditions of realization of harmony. With the realization, material of reflection is incorporated into objects as their meaning. It's sort of interpretive. Since the artist cares in a peculiar way for the phase of experience in which union is achieved, he does not shun moments of resistance and tension. He rather cultivates them not for their own sake, but because of their potentialities, bringing to living consciousness an experience that is unified and total. In contrast with the person whose purpose is aesthetic, the scientific man is interested in problems, in situations where intention between the matter of observation and of thought is marked. Of course, he cares for their resolution, but he does not rest in it. He passes on to another problem, using an attained solution only as a stepping stone from which to set on foot further inquiries. The difference between the aesthetic and the intellectual is thus one of the place where emphasis falls in the constant rhythm that marks the interaction of the live creature with his surroundings. So the same material, but different ways of punctuating across the material with different heights and lows, doings and undergoings. The artist, for example, lingers in the completion, and the intellectual person uh, immediately moves on to more problems as quickly as possible. The ultimate matter of both emphases and experience is the same, as is also their general form. The odd notion that an artist does not think and a scientific inquirer does nothing else is the result of converting the difference of tempo and emphasis into a difference in kind. The thinker has his aesthetic moment when his ideas cease to be mere ideas and become the corporate meanings of objects. The artist has his problems and thinks as he works, but his thought is more immediately embodied in the object. Because of the comparative remoteness of his end, the scientific worker operates with symbols, words, and mathematical signs. The artist does his thinking in the very qualitative media he works in, and the terms lie so close to the object that he is producing that they merge directly into it. The live animal does not have to project emotions into the object's experience. Nature is kind and hateful, bland and morose, irritating and comforting long before she is mathematically qualified or even a congeries of secondary qualities like colors and their shapes. So emotion comes before sensation, uh, and those come before mathematics. It's in that sentence. Dewey says it. Even such words as long and short, solid and hollow, still carry to all, but those who are intellectually specialized, a moral and emotional connotation. The dictionary will inform anyone who consults it that the early use of words like sweet and bitter was not to denote qualities of sense as such, but to discriminate things as favorable and hostile. How could it be otherwise? Direct experience comes from nature and man interacting with each other. In this interaction, human energy gathers, is released, dammed up, frustrated, and victorious. There are rhythmic beats of want and fulfillment, pulses of doing and being withheld from doing. All interactions that affect stability and order in the whirling flux of change are rhythms. There is ebb and flow, systole and diastole, ordered change. The latter moves within bounds. To overpass the limits that are set is destruction and death, out of which, however, new rhythms are built up. The proportionate interception of changes establishes an order that is spatially, not merely temporally patterned. Like the waves of the sea, the ripples of sand, where waves have flowed back and forth, the fleecy and the black-bottomed cloud. Contrast of lack and fullness, of struggle and achievement, of adjustment after consummated irregularity, form the drama in which action, feeling, and meaning are one. The outcome is balance and counterbalance. These are not static nor mechanical. They express power that is intense because measured through overcoming resistance. Environing objects avail and counteravail. There are two sorts of possible worlds in which aesthetic experience would not occur. In a world of mere flux, change would not be cumulative. It would not move toward a close. Stability and rest would have no meaning. Equally is it true, however, that a world that is finished, ended, would have no traits of suspense and crisis, and would offer no opportunity for resolution. So we might add a guiding question here. I'll have to type it in later, but we might add a guiding question here for how do the rhythms of disintegration and consummation between a live creature and its environment produce aesthetic experience? The additional question being, in what two worlds does Dewey, or rather, which two worlds does Dewey describe in which aesthetic experience would be impossible? And you find the answer here, and that can help you frame the two extremes within which um, they're not quite the same as disintegration and consummation, but they are a different set of parameters to it. Where everything is already complete, there is no fulfillment. We envisage with pleasure, and you can see how this influenced my answer. Without disintegration, strife, conflict, and effort, consummation would not be possible. Without consummation and reunion, conflict would be painful and meaningless. So the back and forth is always necessary. Where everything is already complete, there is no fulfillment. So these, yeah, he's talking about too much consummation or too much disintegration. We envisage or imagine with pleasure nirvana and a uniform heavenly bliss only because they are projected upon the background of our present world of stress and conflict. Because the actual world, that in which we live, is a combination of movement and culmination, of breaks and reunions. The experience of a living creature is capable of aesthetic quality. The live being recurrently loses and reestablishes equilibrium with his, it's cut off, but you could say her, but with its surroundings. The moment of passage from disturbance into harmony is that of intensest life. In a finished world, sleep and waking could not be distinguished. In one wholly perturbed, conditions could not even be struggled with. In a world made after the pattern of ours, moments of fulfillment punctuate experience with rhythmically enjoyed intervals. Inner harmony is attained only when, by some means, terms are made with the environment. When it occurs on any other than an objective basis, it is illusory, in extreme cases to the point of insanity. So, when your emotions come from places that are not being carried by the reality of the environment. Fortunately, for variety and experience, terms are made in many ways, ways ultimately decided by selective interest. Pleasures may come about through chance, contact, and stimulation. Such pleasures are not to be despised in a world full of pain, but happiness and delight are a different sort of thing than pleasures. They come to be through a fulfillment that reaches to the depths of our being. So he's kind of talking about eudaimonia here. We can think back to like an activistic, habit-based, character-based virtue ethics from Aristotle. They come to be through a fulfillment or a eudaimonia that reaches to the depths of our being, one that is an adjustment of our whole being with the conditions of existence. In the process of living, attainment of a period of equilibrium is at the same time the initiation of a new relation to the environment, one that brings with it potency of new adjustments to be made through struggle. The time of consummation is also one of beginning anew. Any attempt to perpetuate beyond its term or reinscribe, mythically reinscribe, the enjoyment attending the time of fulfillment and harmony constitutes withdrawal from the world. Hence, it marks the lowering and loss of vitality. So you have to go back to suffering at some point, in a way. But through the phases of perturbation and conflict, there abides the deep-seated memory of an underlying harmony, the sense of which haunts life, like the sense of being founded on a rock. Um, I would, just thinking about the deep-seated memory, I would say that like going back to suffering, quote unquote, should be purposeful, right? It should be goal-oriented or not repeating the same mistakes. As Dewey said in a few paragraphs before, there's a stagnation if there's no lessons learned, if there are no lessons learned. But if lessons are learned, then there's growth. And if lessons are learned and if there's genuine growth, then the new suffering would be new failures and new moments for growth in different directions. And you can very easily think this with habit formation and the kind of packaging or bundling or nesting of skill or understanding of intuition or intuition. So, and chunking in education, or chunking in like just how you learn like play guitar, like you learn pieces of it, and you put those pieces together and you just slowly develop some facility, piecemeal facility. Anyway, most mortals are conscious, though split often occurs between their present living and their past and future. Then the past things, then the past hangs upon them as a burden. It invades the present with a sense of regret, of opportunities not used, and of consequences we wish undone. It rests upon the present as an oppression, instead of being a storehouse of resources by which to move confidently forward. But the live creature adopts its past. So here he's starting to normatize the live creature into the ideal aesthetic experience, aesthetic being, because he's contrasting it with a way that we fail to do things. The live creature adopts its past. So it's sort of an eidetic or an essential kind of production. Like I've heard that Descartes, oh, I know we saw Descartes do this, but I've heard that Levinas does something similar. And I mean, it kind of feels like Dewey is too, but from a pragmatist or evolutionary biology or taking a lot of the world as given after the cogito, basically, and then rethinking the cogito or the conscious experience from the givenness of the intersubjective necessity of evolutionary biology. That's one way to give, like, we're about to end the chapter. That's one way to give, like, a first philosophy stepping stone between these thinkers. Anyway, I wouldn't know how to do it with Levinas. Not yet. The live creature adopts its past. It can make friends with even its stupidities, using them as warnings that increase present wariness. Instead of trying to live upon whatever may have been achieved in the past, it uses past successes to inform the present. Every living experience owes its richness to what Santayana well calls hushed hushed reverberations. I haven't yet read Santayana yet, but I think I need to. I think they were an American philosopher as well. Um, the live creature needs like a certain courage to be afraid. And that goes well with Plato, with his understanding of the fear that the spirit, spirited part, or the spirited element, the spirited emphasis of the soul, plays in the virtue by exhibiting the virtue of courage in being afraid of the failures of immoderations, past mistakes, to produce moderation and maintain moderation in the city and the soul as wisdom and reason. But again, you need the courage, the bravery to be wary and concerned, and to know that things can fail. To the being fully alive, the future is not ominous, but a promise. It surrounds the present as a halo. It consists of possibilities that are felt as a possession of what is now and here, in life that is truly life, Everything overlaps and merges, but all too often we exist in apprehensions of what the future may bring and are divided within ourselves. Even when not over anxious, we do not enjoy the present because we subordinated it to that which is absent. So you can't be too wary. Because of the frequency of this abandonment of the present to the past and future, the happy periods of an experience that is now complete, because it absorbs into itself memories of the past and anticipations of the future. So that's a good encapsulation. It knows where it's been and where it's going, so it has some wisdom from self-awareness from past and some direction and intentionality toward an imagined future. This will repeatedly come up. What's what the stone does as well. In chapter 3, Dewey talks about a stone rolling down a hill, if you missed that in the first lecture. Because it absorbs into itself memories of the past and anticipations of the future, come to constitute an aesthetic ideal. Only when the past ceases to trouble and anticipations of the future are not perturbing is a being wholly united with his environment and therefore fully alive. Art celebrates, so you should be wary but not like troubled. Art celebrates with peculiar intensity the moments in which the past reinforces the present and in which the future is now a quickening or is a quickening of what now is. So in like the past surges to enrich the present and the future excites and motivates the development of the present. Let's read the quote from Santayana in the footnotes. It's so he, the footnote on the sentence with Santayana and the quote hushed reverberations. Well, the footnote is by George Eliot in The Mill on the Floss, but it's a long quote. I'm not really sure what the connection is, if one quotes the other or if it's just another association, but we'll read it. These familiar flowers, these well-remembered bird notes, this sky with its fitful brightness, these furrowed and grassy fields, each with a sort of personality given to it by the capricious hedge. Capricious is volatile or like kind of untrustworthy, but only in the sense of not being predictable. So he talks about caprice as a disintegration that is so scattered that it can't sustain life because it changes and it flits back and forth. But George Eliot is the one using capricious here. Such things as these are the mother tongue of our imagination, the language that is laden with all the subtle, inextricable associations, the fleeting hours of our childhood left behind them. Our delight in the sunshine on the deep-bladed grass today might be no more than the faint perception of wearied souls, if it were not for the sunshine and grass of far-off years which still live in us and transform our perception into love. Worth cross-referencing here. Um, Ralph Waldo Emerson's Divinity School address to Harvard about 100 years before this lecture at Harvard. Um, Either 1840s or 1830s, I think. And it's called Acquaint Thyself Firsthand with Deity. Emerson mentions like the refulgent summer and the experience of the blades of grass as sort of religious experiences or experiences of divinity. And in chapter 2, the live creature and ethereal things, which we're going to get to in this episode, um, we're about to finish this chapter. In chapter 2, Dewey is going to connect this conception of the live creature, this evolutionary biological perspective, with religious experience and aesthetic experience and other thinkers, and call for a monism where the environment and the material spiritual hyphen world on a continuum of refinement and organization or failure, perpetual failure in creation and failure in success. as a matter of growth for the life creatures. Uh, that these processes are, yeah, material, non-dualistic, non-transcendent, immanent. Okay, back to Dewey. To grasp the sources of aesthetic experience, it is therefore necessary to have recourse to animal life below the human scale. The activities of the fox, the dog, and the thrush may at least stand as reminders and symbols of that unity of experience which we so fractionize when work is labor and thought withdraws us from the world. The live animal is fully present, all there in all of its actions, like on the edge, you know? In its wary glances, its sharp sniffings, its abrupt cocking of ears. All sense, all senses are equally on the qui vive. As you watch, you see motion merging into sense and sense into motion, constituting that animal grace so hard for man to rival. There's also a really cool discussion in chapter 2 about this sense of grace through impulsive fluidity and effort, and attentiveness and rapture, aesthetic enrapturement, alongside a sort of like fineness, with human uh, insufficiencies or inability. That may sound like strange, but it really is actually how John Keats uses it. Um, we're going to get to it at the end of chapter 2, but and that will be this episode, should be. But so yeah, he's quoting Keats for a while. In the annotated version that I'm going to scroll down to, this will be on page 33, 3 pages before the end of chapter 2, which ends on 35. So it's only like 16 pages for chapter 2. But there may be reasonings, but when they take an instinctive form, like that of animal forms and movements, they are poetry. They are fine. They have grace. And then Dewey goes on to spend the rest of the chapter explaining how every philosopher or reasoned person discards perceptions which would contradict their argument and selects only the things that support it. So they're using their imagination to steer the direction of the argument, and it's a sort of bias, but everybody is doing their best in that sense. And that's fine. That has grace. So constituting that animal grace so hard for man to rival. And this is the sort of grace Socrates has because he doesn't say things in like a manipulative or pre-planned format, but just speaks at impulse from the earnestness of of a wise and learned perspective, over 70 years of asking questions to try to understand things earnestly. What the live creature retains from the past and what it expects from the future operate as directions in the present. The dog is never pedantic nor academic, for these things arise only when the past is severed in consciousness from the present and is set up as a model to copy or a storehouse upon which to draw. The past, absorbed into the present, carries on. It presses forward. So here he seems to, this always catches me. Here he seems to be praising the storehouse of resources as something that, the past could use to surge forth and reinforce the present. Um, but further down where we just read, he's criticizing uh, humans or academics or pedants, people who are pedantic, miss the point, quibble over fine details. Um, they make these mistakes because they use the past as a storehouse. So there's really different senses of storehouse here. There's the storehouse that reduces the present into the storehouse and like prevents you from continuing to perceive. And then there's the storehouse that lets you deal with unique solution or situations, unique problems, find creative solutions to complex issues that otherwise wouldn't have solutions. Um, and new survival strategies, etc., which are all pragmatic concerns. The past absorbed into the present carries on. It presses forward. So the storehouse grows and thrives as it emerges through the present. It's not this kind of regressive catalog that always pulls things back into it. There is much in the life of the savage that is sodden, but when the savage, again, we're critical of the use of savage here, but when the savage is most alive, he is most observant of the world about him and most taut with energy. What does sodden mean? Dull or expressionless, especially from continued indulgence in alcoholic beverages. Extremely wet, soaked with liquid or moisture. Like a old British term. As he watches what stirs about him, he too is stirred. His observation is both action and preparation and foresight of the future. He is as active through his whole being when he looks and listens as when he stalks his quarry or stealthily retreats from a foe. His senses are sentinels of immediate thought and outposts of action, and not, as they so often are with us, mere pathways along which material is gathered to be stored away for a delayed and remote possibility. So we're almost done with the chapter. We should be very critical of Dewey here. There's a colonial kind of Orientalism that mythologizes or fetishizes primitive quote unquote cultures. I think the whole like path of development of cultures might even be disproven at this point. There are still cultures in today's world that are quote unquote primitive, and it's not worse or less developed. In many ways, it's more reasonable. And I think that's what Dewey is in a way saying is he's using them as a way to um help us get outside of our Western prejudices and rethink what we might have quote unquote lost. But we should again be very critical and sensitive to the fact that that whole articulation and argument and discourse depends upon certain principles and assumptions about superiority and development, which are very Western and often colonial and genocidal in lots of countries and billions of people, genocidal. The discourse is related. There's no equivocation. It is mere ignorance that leads them to the supposition. Here we have the storehouse model again, stored away for a delayed and remote possibility. So like picked apart, labeled, and tried to remember. It is mere ignorance that leads then to the supposition that connection of art and aesthetic perception with experience signifies a lowering of their significance and dignity. Experience in the degree in which it is experience is heightened vitality. Instead of signifying being shut up within one's own private feelings and sensations, it signifies active and alert commerce with the world. At its height, it signifies complete interpenetration of self and the world of objects and events. Instead of signifying surrender to caprice and disorder, it affords our sole demonstration of a stability that is not stagnation, but is rhythmic and developing. In like the start in like a two like hold on. Because see, we've got like two sentences left. This uh the stability that is not stagnation but is rhythmic and developing will be the kind of turning engine of the early part of the next chapter. But our questions for chapter two will be more piecemeal. Let's finish chapter one. Because experience is the fulfillment of an organism in its struggles and achievements in the world of things, it is art in germ or in its seed form, in its seed-like form. It's imminent. Deleuze talks about the imminence of the tree and the seed. Even in its rudimentary forms, it contains the promise of that delightful perception, which is aesthetic experience. So it'd be super cool to talk about um, the immanent virtual in relation to John Dewey's aesthetics, because Deleuze does a lot about creation and film and art, a lot of art critique. That delightful perception, which is aesthetic experience. Okay, chapter two. So with chapter one, our questions were, why are museums an unacceptable starting point for a pragmatist account of art and of aesthetic experience? So if you can't answer these, you should spend some more time chewing on the things we've already discussed, because we're going to move on to new questions. So you might want to go back from here, or whatever that means. 1A, and these are the other questions, still from chapter one. 1A, why are works of art more than just objects, but are rather also an experience in themselves? 1B, how does mind-body dualism separate art from everyday experience and thereby estrange the live creature from intrinsic spiritual fulfillment? 1C, what role do museums play in this propagation of dualism? How do museums separate art from everyday life and reinforce mind-body dualism? So that was all from the first section, first part of chapter one, roughly half of it. Two, the rest of it. How do the rhythms of disintegration and consummation between the live creature and its environment produce aesthetic experience? And then there's one sub-question for that, 2A. Why does Dewey turn to the live creature for the starting point of aesthetic experience and of a philosophy of art, where philosophy must be communicated via discourse, maybe a theory, but also is not, relegated to what we would traditionally call theories, as Dewey has made clear in the first chapter, and I think we read it together in this episode, but it's still the first chapter. Um, Maybe an experience or state of affairs, etc. And then this three will kind of be related to what we read in chapter two. How does emotional sense and direct experience produce, but also absorb, intellectual linguistic symbolism? 3A, in what ways does this passage show that our actions and decisions are aesthetically motivated, insofar as our attention is captured by aesthetic interests? All right, chapter 2. 1. Uh, what is the difference between mere recognition and aesthetic perception? Two, why is art primary to science, i.e., why is science merely a handmaiden to the arts? 3, what is art's relation to material and ethereal things? 4, how does art's capacity for emotional resonance and affection across diverse bodies and histories provide the foundations for a common civil life of democracy and for sharing being slash existence slash consciousness slash experience? 5, how is animism related to aesthetic experience? 6, how does reasoning require deflection and abeyance of objections in favor of intuition and imagination? 7, how does aesthetic perception require acceptance of half knowledge? We're going to wait for those answers until we come across those places in the text. I'm going to pause here and get some water. All right. Might need more water, but chapter 2, the live creature and quote, ethereal things. So there's an asterisk in the title of this chapter, which means we're going to jump down and read that before we even start the chapter. This is a quote from John Keats. The sun, the moon, the earth, and its contents are material to form greater things, that is, ethereal things, greater things than the Creator himself made. Not to be blasphemous. All right, top of the chapter, these are Dewey's words. Why is the attempt? So we can already start to answer, what is art's relation to material and ethereal things? The answer for that being that art is a refinement of material things into ethereal formations. I'm not sure if we can cleanly say it's material things into ethereal forms. I think ethereal things are still ethereal things. Why is the attempt to connect the higher and ideal things of experience with basic vital roots so often regarded as betrayal of their nature and denial of their value? Why is there repulsion when the high achievements of fine art are brought into connection with common life, the life that we share with all living creatures? Why is life thought of as an affair of low appetite, or at its best, a thing of gross sensation, and ready to sink from its best to the level of lust and harsh cruelty? A complete answer to the question would involve the writing of a history of morals that would set forth the conditions that have brought about contempt for the body, fear of the senses, and the opposition of flesh to spirit. One aspect of this history is so relevant to our problem that it must receive at least passing notice. The institutional life of mankind is marked by disorganization. So this is a really helpful passage where he discusses that he critiques common notions of organization as separation and instead advocates for organization as harmony or integration. Consummation, aesthetic consummation. This disorder is often disguised by the fact that it takes the form of static division into classes, and this static separation is accepted as the very essence of order as long as it is so fixed and so accepted as not to generate open conflict. Life is compartmentalized, and the institutionalized compartments are classified as high and as low, their values as profane and spiritual, as material and ideal. Interests are related to one another externally and mechanically through a system of checks and balances. Since religion, morals, politics, business has each its own compartment within which it is fitting each should remain, art too must have its peculiar and private realm. Compartmentalization of occupations and interests brings about separation of that mode of activity commonly called practice from insight, of imagination from executive doing, of significant purpose from work, of emotion from thought and doing. Each of these has too its own place in which it must abide. Those who write the anatomy of experience then suppose that these divisions inhere in the very constitution of human nature. Of much of our experience, so he's saying that like because we follow that practice, and here means like it must be like innate to experience itself. Of much of our experience as it is actually lived under present economic and legal institutional conditions, it is only too true that these separations hold. Only occasionally in the lives of many are the senses fraught with the sentiment that comes from deep realization of intrinsic meanings. We undergo sensations as mechanical stimuli or as irritated stimulations without having a sense of the reality that is in them and behind them. In much of our experience, our different senses do not unite to tell a common and enlarged story. We see without feeling. We hear, but only a secondhand report. Secondhand because not reinforced by vision. We touch, but the contact remains tangential because it does not fuse with qualities of senses that go below the surface. We use the senses to arouse passion, but not to fulfill the interest of insight. Not because that interest is not potentially present in the exercise of senses, but because we yield to conditions of living that force sense to remain in excitation on the surface. Prestige goes to those who use their minds without participation of the body and who act vicariously through control of the bodies and labor of others. Under such conditions, sense and flesh get a bad name. The moralist, however, has a truer sense of the intimate connections of sense with the rest of our being than has the professional psychologist and philosopher, although his sense of these connections takes a direction that reverses the potential facts of our living in relation to the environment. Psychologist and philosopher have in recent times been so obsessed with the problem of knowledge that they have created sensations, quote unquote, as mere elements of knowledge. The moralist knows that sense is allied with motion, impulse, and appetition, so he denounces the lust of the eye as part of the surrender of spirit to flesh. He identifies the sensuous with the sensual and the sensual with the lewd. His moral theory is askew, but at least he is aware that the eye is not an imperfect telescope designed for intellectual reception of material to bring about knowledge of distant objects. Okay, I think I need to stretch my legs. Give me a sec. All right, I'm back. Just like 2 minutes. Digesting that food, sorry. Sense covers a wide range of contents. The sensory, the sensational, the sensitive, the sensible, and the sentimental, along with the sensuous. It includes almost everything from bare physical and emotional shock to sense itself. That is, the meaning of things present in immediate experience. Each term refers to some real phase, an aspect of the life of an organic creature as life occurs through sense organs. But sense, as meaning so directly embodied in experience as to be its own illuminated meaning, is the only signification that expresses the function of sense organs when they are carried to full realization. The senses are the organs through which the live creature participates directly in the ongoings of the world about him. And in this participation, the varied wonder and splendor of this world are made actual for him in the qualities he experiences. This material cannot be opposed to action, for motor apparatus and, quote, will itself are the means by which this participation is carried on and directed. It cannot be opposed. So action was the practical thing. So he's gonna use this to connect. He's gonna use sense to connect practical, emotional, and intellectual. Next is intellectual. It cannot be opposed to intellect, for mind is the means by which participation is rendered fruitful through sense, by which meanings and values are extracted, retained, and put to further service in the intercourse of the live creature with its surroundings. Um, and it might be that he expects emotion to already be obviously be a part of sense, sensation and experience. Experience is the result, the sign, and the reward of that interaction of organism and environment which, when it is carried to the full, was a transformation of interaction into participation and communication. Sense, sense organs, with their connected motor apparatus, are the means of this participation. Any and every derogation of them, whether practical or theoretical, is at once effect and cause of a narrowed and dulled life experience. Oppositions of mind and body, soul and matter, spirit and flesh, all have their origin fundamentally in fear of what life may bring forth. They are marks of contraction and withdrawal. So creating these false dyads and dualisms is a disintegration in moments of strife or fear of life or a misunderstanding. Um, and like I said before, these are the continuums he's going to try to resolve in this episode. Full recognition, therefore, of the continuity of the organs, needs, and basic impulses of the human creature with his animal forebears implies no necessary reduction of man to the level of the brutes. On the contrary, it makes possible the drawing of a ground plan of human experience, upon which is erected the superstructure of man's marvelous and distinguishing experience. What is distinctive in man makes it possible for him to sink below the level of the beasts. It also makes it possible for him to carry to new and unprecedented heights that unity of sense and impulse, of brain and eye and ear that is exemplified in animal life, saturating it with the conscious meanings derived from communication and deliberate expression. So we have intentionality then, not just engagement and interchange, but intention and communion in a way, a melding, a conscious melding. Let's see if any of these questions can be answered yet. No, not number one, not two. Two has a very specific answer. Not three, not four. Okay. Maybe three. I meant to say not four, not five. Maybe three. What is art's relation to material and ethereal things? We're still really working through that one. Man excels in complexity and minuteness of differentiations. This very fact constitutes the necessity for many more comprehensive and exact relationships. We are also kind of still engaging question three from the previous chapter. How does emotional sense and direct experience produce, but also absorb intellectual linguistic symbolism? This is another way of asking how experience, consciousness, and language and perception are all simultaneously practical or volitional, will-based or duty, like kind of intention-based, emotional or aesthetic, and intellectual or mental. And all that is also embodied in interchange and commerce with the environment and the world. In phenomenology, the environment is called world. But it's the same structure. It's the same experience. Man excels in complexity and minuteness of differentiations. This very fact constitutes the necessity for many more comprehensive and exact relationships among the constituents of his being. Important as are the distinctions and relations thus made possible, the story does not end here. There are more opportunities for resistance and tension, more drafts upon experimentation and invention, and therefore more novelty in action, greater range and depth of insight, and increase of poignancy and feeling. As an organism increases in complexity, the rhythms of struggle and consummation in its relation to its environment are varied and prolonged, and they come to include within themselves an endless variety of subrhythms. The designs of living are widened and enriched. Fulfillment is more massive and more subtly shaded. Space thus becomes something more than a void in which to roam about, dotted here and there with dangerous things, and things that satisfy the appetite. It, being space, becomes a comprehensive and enclosed scene within which are ordered the multiplicity of doings and undergoings in which man engages. Let me say that again. Space becomes a comprehensive and enclosed scene within which are ordered the multiplicity of doings and undergoings in which man engages. Kind of theatrical. Time ceases to be either the endless and uniform flow or the succession of instantaneous points, which some philosophers have asserted it to be. It too is the organized an organizing medium of the rhythmic ebb and flow of expectant impulse, forward and retracted movement, resistance and suspense, with fulfillment and consummation. So here we have intuitive time, duration. It is an ordering, well, and a development of it with Dewey's own perspective. It is an ordering of growth and maturations. As James said, we learn to skate in summer after having commenced in winter. Time as organization and change is growth, and growth signifies that a varied series of change enters upon intervals of pause and rest, of completions that become the initial points of new processes of development. Like the soil, mind is fertilized while it lies fallow until a new burst of bloom ensues. We see here the edge nature where doing and undergoing are constantly happening, and a future doing is being prepared in the rest and therefore cannot be separated. When a flash of lightning illumines a dark landscape, there is a momentary recognition of objects, but the recognition is not itself a mere point in time. It is the focal culmination of long, slow processes of maturation. It is the manifestation of the continuity of an ordered temporal experience in a sudden, discrete instant of climax. It is as meaningless in isolation as would be the drama of Hamlet, were it confined to a single line or word with no context. But the phrase, "the rest is silence," is infinitely pregnant as the conclusion of a drama enacted through development and time. So may be the momentary perception of a natural scene. Form, as it is present in the fine arts, is the art of making clear what is involved in the organization of space and time, prefigured in every course of a developing life experience. So that's one way of saying that the aesthetic form, not the aesthetic experience, but the aesthetic form, is a democratic sharing of common elements of the live creature's experience in life. Moments and places, so we'll read that again. Form as it is present in the fine arts is the art of making clear what is involved in the organization of space and time prefigured in every course of a developing life experience. Elsewhere at the end of chapter 3, he'll say that an aesthetic experience is particularly aesthetic when it draws out the elements of every experience that are latent and hidden, but essential to the consummation or coherence of the unified aesthetic, of the consummation of any experience, which is always aesthetic. But most of the time, it's under the surface doing the work, and in aesthetic experiences, it's drawn to the surface as the coherence, the cohering element, which is coherent of a creature's meaning across experiences, which is universal only insofar as creatures share experiences, which is particularly universal with these common structures of experience, like doing and undergoing. Moments and places, despite physical limitation and narrow localization, are charged with accumulations of long gathering energy. A return to a scene of childhood that was left long years before floods the spot with a release of pent-up memories and hopes. To meet in a strange country one who is a casual acquaintance at home may arouse a satisfaction so acute as to bring a thrill. Mere recognitions occur only when we are occupied with something else than the object or person recognized. So here we're getting into the question one. What is the difference between mere recognition and aesthetic perception? It marks mere recognitions occur only when we are occupied with something else than the object or person recognized. It marks either an interruption or else an intent to use what is recognized as a means for something else. To see, to perceive, is more than to recognize. It does not identify something present in terms of a past disconnected from it. The past is carried into the present so as to expand and deepen the content of the latter. There is illustrated the translation of bare continuity of external time into the vital order and organization of experience. Identification nods and passes on. Or it defines a passing moment in isolation, like an analysis. It marks a dead spot in experience that is merely filled in. The extent to which the process of living in any day or hour is is reduced to labeling situations, events, and objects as so and so in mere succession marks the cessation of a life that is a conscious experience. So here we're reminded of both Plato's allegory of the cave with the puppet on the wall and the kind of shadow games that he talks about having to go back in and play, where you label, where you would compete to see who is best at labeling which shadows come after which shadows. We're also reminded here of Socrates in the Apology when he says that the unexamined life is not worth living. There is this sense, some sense, um, that you can lose your awareness of consciousness, or you can kind of zone out on your life. Descartes talks about this. Socrates was talking about that, and unexamined life is not worth living. And Descartes, says, cogito ergo sum, I think therefore I am. A lot of people misappropriate and abuse that eidetic ground as something linguistic, like, oh, everybody should be thinking rationally all the time and deducting calculations. And like, no, that's not, what Descartes was saying. He wasn't advocating for the formal logical system developed 300 years after he existed. Um, but here we have Dewey offering a way to enrich or vitalize our conscious awareness that honors emotion, aesthetics, feeling, and aesthetics. That honors monism and the co-production of rationality and feeling with an environment to the best of our ability. It's very human pursuit of a good life, of a rich life. Not control, but enlivenment. Enlivenment? Whatever. Continuities realized in an individual discrete form are the essence of a conscious experience instead of the labeling. So seeing the process in the present, or always, remembering to imagine the process. Art is thus prefigured in the very processes of living. A bird builds its nest and a beaver its dam when internal organic pressures cooperate with external materials so that the former are fulfilled and the latter are transformed in a satisfying culmination. We may hesitate to apply the word art since we doubt the presence of directive intent, but all deliberation, all conscious intent, like I said before, this is when he's talking about a beaver building its dam and um, how intentional production of anything is a replication of the causal functions that we observe through learning and understanding the truths and workings of nature and our environment. But all deliberation, all conscious intent grows out of things once performed organically through the interplay of natural energies. Were it not so, art would be built on quaking sands, nay, on unstable air. The distinguishing contribution of man is consciousness of the relations found in nature. Through consciousness, he converts the relations of cause and effect that are found in nature into relations of means and consequence, as I've said a few times now. Rather, consciousness itself is the inception of such a transformation. What was mere shock becomes an invitation. Resistance becomes something to be used in changing existing arrangements of matter. Sorry, guys, I can't see right now. Smooth facilities become agencies for executing an idea. In these operations, an organic stimulation becomes the bearer of meanings, and motor responses are changed into instruments of expression and communication. No longer are they mere means of locomotion and direct reaction. Meanwhile, the organic substratum remains as the quickening and deep foundation. Apart from relations of cause and effect in nature, conception and invention could not be. Apart from the relation of processes of rhythmic conflict and fulfillment in animal life, experience would be without design and pattern. Apart from organs inherited from animal ancestry, idea and purpose would be without a mechanism of realization. The primeval arts of nature and animal life are so much the material and in gross outline, so much the model for the intentional achievements of man, that the theologically minded have imputed conscious intent to the structure of nature, as man, sharing many activities with the ape, is wont to think of the latter as imitating his own performances. The existence of art, so that was his critique of the argument from design, the watchmaker's argument for God's existence. The existence of art is the concrete proof of what has just been stated abstractly. It is proof that man uses the materials and energies of nature with intent to expand his own life, and that he does so in accord with the structure of his organism, brain, sense organs, and muscular system. Art is the living and concrete proof that man is capable of restoring consciously, and thus on the plane of meaning, the union of sense, need, impulse, and action characteristic of the life creature. The intervention of consciousness adds regulation, power of selection, and redisposition. Thus, it varies the arts in ways without end, but its intervention also leads in time to the idea of art as a conscious idea, the greatest intellectual achievement in the history of humanity, which is different from art from l'art pour l'art. All right, so far we can answer 1, 3, maybe 4, and okay. The variety and perfection of the arts in Greece led thinkers, we're about to actually get to the answer to number 2. Why is art? So number 1 is what is the difference between mere recognition and aesthetic perception? You should be able to answer that now. Number 3, what is art's relation to material and ethereal things? Also should be answerable. And number 4, possibly answerable. How does art's capacity for emotional resonance and affection across diverse bodies and histories provide the foundations for a common civil life of democracy and for sharing being slash existence slash consciousness slash experience? Let's look at some of these answers on the whiteboard. Oh, how does emotional sense and direct experience produce but also absorb intellectual linguistic symbolism? Because artworks are a language, we can see the continuity of expressive thought and communication. Sense is organized and refined into its more technical forms, such as math and science, which we're about to see in the next paragraph. Because sense evokes language and historical knowledge, we can infer that holistic sense absorbs such language. 4, what is the difference between mere recognition and aesthetic perception? These are two different answers, I think. Mere recognition is about identifying something without engaging with it on a deeper level, whereas aesthetic perception is about experiencing it while also connecting an emotional response to it dependent on one's past. Recognition is quickly identifying something familiar from past experiences without much thought. Perception involves a deeper engagement where you fully appreciate the details and emotions of what you are experiencing. Number 6, what is art's relation to material and ethereal things? Art is a bridge between material and ethereal things. Art acts as a ley line from past to present, unifying supposed dualities, and art is a material expression of ethereal things through or via the medium of matter. 7. How does art's capacity for emotional resonance and affection across diverse bodies and histories provide the foundations for a common civil life of democracy and for sharing being slash existence slash consciousness slash experience? The fact that works of art can have overlapping, pseudo-universal common impacts, despite our differences, implies a common biological life, which simultaneously can serve and function as the stable grounding of democracy. Moreover, art promotes this democratic grounding. Number 6 again, what is art's relation to material and ethereal things? Art making is the transformation of material matter into ethereal things, or the organization, transformation organizations. 7 again about democracy and art. Artworks and experience intensify and crystallize universal biological processes and struggles as previous experiences, i.e., histories, and as future goods, i.e., future goals, i.e., needs. This common biological life stably grounds democracy in shared interactions. 7 again. The fact that works of art can resonate with diverse sets of lived experience implies a universal common life of all live creatures deep below conscious awareness, which we might call, quote, primitive relationships. This grounding stabilizes democracy. So I think primitive relationships is a phrase Dewey uses. 6 again, what is art's relation to material and ethereal things? Art is the melding of material things to express, symbolize, convey, and form ethereal experiences. Our relation to art is not just with a complete art piece, but with our experiences and formation of the art. Works of art transform material matter into ethereal things. All right. It looks like we have like 3 answers for 8, 9, and 10 as well. So I'll do those more piecemeal. We'll do all 3 8s, all 3 9s, all 3 10s. And next we'll do 5 after we read that paragraph. The variety and perfection of the arts in Greece led thinkers to frame a generalized conception of art and to project the ideal of an art of organization of human activities as such, the art of politics and morals as conceived by Socrates and Plato. The ideas of design, plan, order, pattern, purpose emerged in distinction from and relation to the materials employed in their realization. The conception of man as the being that uses art became at once the ground of the distinction of man from the rest of nature and of the bond that ties him to nature. When the conception of art as the distinguishing trait of man was made explicit, there was assurance that, short of complete relapse of humanity below even savagery, the possibility of invention of new arts would remain, along with use of old arts, as the guiding ideal of mankind. Although recognition of the fact still halts because of traditions established before the power of art was adequately recognized, science itself is but a central art auxiliary to the generation and utilization of other arts. Question 5. Why is art primary, or question 2? Sorry, I was using different numbers because the whiteboard has different numbers. Why is art primary to science, i.e., why is science merely a handmaid to the arts? So this artist experience comes after experience in nature, which is a big text in Dewey. I haven't read it. I got a copy recently. I have developed this point in experience in nature in chapter 9 on experience, nature, and art. As far as the present point is concerned, the conclusion is contained in the statement that, quote, art, the mode of activity that is charged with meanings capable of immediately enjoyed possession, is the complete culmination of nature, and that science is properly a handmaiden that conducts natural events to this happy issue. End quote. Page 358, Experience in Nature, John Dewey. And whiteboard answers. The purpose of art is to enrich life's intrinsic meaning. Science, as a specific, refined technological art, is only ultimately useful slash meaningful insofar as it supports aesthetic enrichment. Art, so this is a good argument for not needing like more money than you can do things with. Um, Art is the complete culmination of nature. Therefore, science is its handmaiden that conducts natural events to this happy issue. That was, I think, just the complete, that was a quote. All right. It is customary and from some points of view necessary to make a distinction between fine art and useful or technological art. But the point of view from which it is necessary is one that is extrinsic to the work of art itself. The customary distinction is based simply on acceptance of certain existing social conditions. Um, let's look up what fetishes are. I don't think it's like fetishes. I think it's like beautiful work. Um, not to infringe on copyrights or anything like that. This might just be a point we need to critique because he might mean it might just be a different spelling of fetish. And then again, we're back to the issue that we have with savages, the use of the word savages. Um, and this sort of Orientalism of othering, right? Because we can respect difference without othering and without fetishizing. Because fetishizing is to like make make a spectacle out of something that should be normal. Um, and then I think this word, if you can see on screen, um, is just the way to refer. I mean, it really wasn't the right because he talks about tribal group further down. So I'm going to say African instead, and I think Dewey could have been more respectful here. So the customary distinction is based simply on acceptance of certain existing social conditions. I suppose the fetishes of the African sculptor were taken to be useful in the highest degree to his tribal group, more so than even than spears and clothing. But now they are fine art serving in the 20th century to inspire renovations in arts that had grown conventional. So I guess there's a whole discourse around this. And he's quite possibly just talking about ritual statues. It's kind of strange. Obviously, in past readings of this, I've just kind of chastised it and tried to move on without really parsing too much of it. But in a public context, I'd like to parse it like this. Um, So let me just, I guess, say that again with some historical context. Uh, what Dewey means here is, I suppose the ritual statues of the African sculpture were taken to be useful in the highest degree to his tribal group, more so even than spears and clothing. So he wasn't actually having that sort of Orientalist issue with some other culture. I thought it was something like that. I thought it was a specific type of thing that they made, but a terrible, like a there is still the issue of the word, like, I mean, sorry that wasn't obvious. Calling them fetishes is an issue. Um, and that's obviously why I corrected it in my own presentation of it. But now they are fine art, serving in the 20th century to inspire renovations in arts that had grown conventional. But they are fine art only because the anonymous artist lived and experienced so fully during the process of production. So we see here the first presentation of the idea that the degree of aesthetic perception or quality or the extent to which a work of art is capable of producing aesthetic experience depends upon the extent to which the artist was undergoing aesthetic experience while making the work of art, so that the work of art's production was informed by the nuances of whether or not it was continually producing aesthetic experience and would therefore continually produce aesthetic experience on people. Hopefully that made sense at some point along the way. It made sense to me, so I assume it made sense to you because that's how aesthetic experience works. An angler may eat his catch without thereby losing the aesthetic satisfaction he experienced in casting and playing. It is this degree of completeness of living in the experience of making and of perceiving that makes the difference between what is fine or aesthetic in art and what is not. Whether the thing made is put to use, as are bowls, rugs, garments, weapons, is, intrinsically speaking, a matter of indifference. That many, perhaps most, of the articles and utensils made at present for use are not genuinely aesthetic happens, unfortunately, to be true. But it is true for reasons that are foreign to the relation of the beautiful and useful as such. Wherever conditions are such as to prevent the act of production from being an experience, in which the whole creature is alive and in which he possesses his living through enjoyment, the product will lack something of being aesthetic. No matter how useful it is for special and limited ends, it will not be useful in the ultimate degree, that of contributing directly and liberally to an expanding and enriched life. So there again, we have the direct formulation of kind of the principal ethical goal for Dewey. The story of the severance and final sharp opposition of the useful and the fine is the history of that industrial development through which so much of production has become a form of postponed living, and so much of consumption a superimposed enjoyment of the fruits of the labor of others, instead of an intrinsically gratifying appreciation or experience or production. Okay, we're a few minutes shy of, we've got 10 pages left in this chapter, and we're a few minutes shy of the 90-minute mark. But there's a section break here, and it seems like a good point to, I don't really want to like, it feels awkward closing um after we had to criticize and then translate Dewey's issues, but the section break happens at the end of that very same paragraph, bottom of the page. Paragraph's almost a full page long. Um, so it just is what it is. And I'll be back tonight to keep going as soon as this video processes. So thanks for being here. Thanks for having me. And I will see you guys soon. Let me know if you need anything. Take care. Yada yada. Read ahead if you want. Check out the guiding questions. They're the same as what I discussed before. We're still waiting on 5 through 7. How is animism related to aesthetic experience? How does reasoning require deflection and abeyance of objections in favor of intuition and imagination? And 7, how does aesthetic perception require acceptance of half knowledge? We might come across another answer to 4, but 1 through 3 should definitely be wrapped up by now. So take a look at those questions again if you need to. And thanks again, guys. See you soon. Bye.